Hi everyone, it's Ms. Richardson and this is the second in my Section C How to Unpick series of videos. This one focuses on Paper 2, Section C. So, just like Section C in Paper 1, there are two texts. There is no comparison required, once again, and your selection is key, even more this time, for two reasons. First of all, you get to choose which texts you answer which question on. For paper 1, Death of a Salesman in Keats is your only option. In this paper, you have the option of the 3 texts that you've been studying, and you can answer your section B question with 1 text, your section C question with 2 texts. So it's up to you to decide which texts you're going to look at, and also there is a selection of questions, there is a choice, so you can choose between 2 questions. So it's a good idea to really have a good think about that before you get stuck in. Just like in the paper 1 section C video, we're going to go through a 3-step process just to simplify things. Identifying keywords, asking relevant questions about those keywords, and then answering the questions so that we know that we've unpicked the question successfully. So what does a Paper 2 Section C question look like? It's not a to what extent question. There is a choice of explore the significance questions. So you're thinking about how writers create meaning within a specific generic feature. You will either have a statement, kind of a quotation which will guide you in some way, and a question, or a standalone question, and it's up to you to choose whichever one you like. My advice to you would be, if you do choose the one with the statement, do bring that into your response somehow, because that helps you to kind of diversify and expand your thinking. So here is an example of 2 questions from an actual AQA exam paper. I'll just let you read through those now, and I would just ask you to pause the video and take a look and think about what your initial response would be to these questions. Just pause the video now and take a quick look. So before we begin to look at the questions, I just wanted to flag up some advice from the exam board, which came from the most recent examiner's report. The most important thing, as always, is to know your texts. Even though this is an open book exam, unlike paper 1, that makes it even more difficult because you don't want to be flipping backwards and forwards through the books. You need to know exactly where the evidence is that you want. Also, the exam board says to keep an open mind about which text to use. You might decide that you absolutely love Tony Harrison, you want to write a full essay on Harrison, and then you get into the exam and the section B questions are terrible for Harrison. So don't kind of preempt yourself there. The exam board keep talking about examples as well, specific examples that then you can use to provide really fruitful discussion about the significances within the texts. And also remember to range around the text, show that you can pull out specific examples that relate to each other within a specific text. Their advice is to foreground the feature in the text, so whatever feature is being asked about in the question, for example, power or oppression, where does it feature in the text? And then pin down examples. Think specific, not general. Also, the idea of significance often confuses people. In this sense, it is not the idea of importance, it's about meaning. So what is signified through example possible meanings, different interpretations, authorial methods, and different considerations about the lens of the genre. I also wanted to give you a little bit of advice from us. We would say, to answer the paper in reverse, do section C first, then section B, then section A. So once you've read through all of the questions and decided which questions you're going to do, start with section C, because that means that you've definitely covered your 2 texts, and so you should be able to cover all the texts within the allotted time. So today we're going to have a look at the non-statement question. So this one doesn't have a quotation to steer it. Let's have a read through of it. Explore the significance of the abuse of power as presented in 2 political and social protest texts you have studied. Remember to include in your answer relevant detailed exploration of the author's methods. We have that in every single question. The author's methods are absolutely paramount. They do like to remind you of that quite a lot. So the first thing that you need to do is identify the key words within the question. I'm just going to ask you to pause the video now and decide which words you would underline or circle. So I hope that, like me, you've gone for these ones. You need to be thinking about the feature of the genre, in this case, abuse of power. Then I would say you think about the methods and then think about the significance, because then you're thinking about the relationship between the methods and then what meaning is created by those methods. You then need to question those keywords or terms for each text that you've decided to focus on. So what I'd suggest you do now again is pause the video and just think about what kind of questions you'd need to ask about abuse of power within the text, where is it, significance, and the methods that the writers use. So first of all, you need to ask what powers are held and how are they abused. This question did flummox some students because they just focused on power. If you do that, you're not answering the full question. It's about the abuse of power. So you need to think in your text, what are the powers that are held, by who, and how are those powers abused? So ultimately, whatever your feature is that you've been asked to look at for this question, think about what is actually being asked and where is it within your text. You then need to think about methods. You've got to think about the form. Is it a play? Is it a poem? Is it a novel? Always at A-level, think about the writer's structural choices. Avoid your one-word analysis if you possibly can. Think more about how the text is put together and how that is significant. And then finally, you need to be asking yourself, so what? The writer is writing about a particular feature. They're using specific methods. So what? What possible meanings does that create? How can you possibly interpret that? And what does it say? What's the writer saying about the world, on the big world, through the small world that they've created within their text? Okay, now you need to think about answering those questions so you can start to really focus in on what you're actually going to write about. I am going to use Harrison as an example, but I'm going to keep it quite generic as I know that people are studying different texts. So if I'm thinking about abuse of power in Harrison, he focuses a lot on the ruling class's abuse of power over those that they're responsible for. He writes often about employers or industrialists and their abuse of power over their workers, and the abuse of power over those who are incarcerated or vulnerable in many ways. For example, I'd be immediately thinking here of the poem Working and the poem National Trust. I then need to start thinking about that writer's specific methods. Because we're an A-level lit now, I don't want to be thinking so much in terms of little language features. I want to be thinking of the bigger picture a little bit more. So if I was thinking about Harrison, I know that he uses a lot of different voices within his poems, so I'll be thinking about where they were placed within the poem and whose have emphasis. You might want to think about the perspective from whom your text is written, the structure or the form of the poem and how Harrison is conforming to or subverting those, and I'll be thinking about rhyme and rhythm and word emphasis. Obviously, depending on your writer, your methods might be different. Finally, there is the so what. So I might say something like that Harrison is condemning the abuse, but at the same time, maybe there's an irony at play there. So ultimately, it's up to you to decide what you think your writer is saying, what sort of light your writer is casting on the issues that they are tackling within their text. So at this point, you should be ready to choose your brilliant examples and start to plan. I hope that's been useful. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.